Present-day circus acts showcase physical strength, agility, and daring showmanship. From thrilling aerial maneuvers to ground acrobatics, modern circus performers continue to amaze audiences worldwide. And we must not forget the clowns, whose comedy, timing, and dexterity often hide just how much hard work goes into perfecting their performance. If you enter the circus tent today, you can expect breathtaking aerial acts featuring trapeze artists and aerial silks suspended high above the crowd. Audiences watch in awe as performers twist and swing through the air, holding their breath in anticipation of disaster should one wrong move send them falling. Even knowing there are harnesses or safety nets below, the tension and fear still feel very real. Ground acrobatics require incredible human strength, flexibility, and endurance. Human pyramids, contortionists, tumblers, and dancers bend and move their bodies in positions most of us cannot even imagine ourselves. Object manipulation acts include juggling, plate spinning, hula hoops, knife throwing, and countless other skills that clearly requires years of practice and discipline to master. Equilibristic acts focus on balance and precision. Tightrope walkers, stilt walkers, and daredevils who push limits of the human courage by performing above ravines, city streets, or impossible heights. Then there are the traditional performers, the clowns, the ringmasters, and the animal trainers, who once formed the heart of circus entertainment. Modern circuses are designed to create enjoyment for the whole family, but over the years, the circus itself has changed dramatically. Health and safety regulations, along with changing attitudes towards cruelty and exploitation, transformed what audiences would accept as entertainment. Because circuses were once notorious for showcasing the strange, the unusual, and the unexplained, under flickering lanterns and striped tents, everyday people paid coins to witness giants, living skeletons, tattooed performers, conjoined twins, bearded ladies, and people advertised as human curiosities. Sometimes even mysterious creatures were displayed, things audiences could barely identify, yet lined up to stare at it anyway. To the crowd, they were spectacles, oddities, freaks. But behind the banners and dramatic stage names were real human beings trying to survive the only way they could. For many, carnival life offered an escape from poverty, rejection, or institutions that hid people with disabilities away from society. In a time before social assistance or equal opportunity, having a visible disability, medical condition, or unusual appearance often made ordinary employment impossible. Joining a circus or sideshow was sometimes the only way to earn a living. For some performers, the circus brought fame, freedom, and financial success. Others endured exploitation, humiliation, and cruelty from audiences who paid simply to laugh, point, and stare. Today, I want to look beyond the spectacle and ask the question, who were these people really? What were their lives like away from the crowds and the carnival lights? Why did they enter the world of the freak show? And who were the human beings behind the masks, costumes, and performances? Here's what I found out. Annie Jones. There were many bearded ladies, but none so famous as Annie Jones, reported to be born with facial hair. Born in Virginia in July 1865, her appearance would have shocked onlookers at this strange infant who already showed signs of hair. Her parents could only see the financial potential, and she became part of the P.T. Barnum's freak show at a horrifying young age of 9 months. Yes, 9 months. Her parents earning $150 a week salary for their daughter, she was billed as the new infant Esau, a reference to the famously hairy brother of Jacob in the Old Testament. She became so popular, her mother was offered a 3-year contract, but Annie's life as a spectacle did not end when the contract ended. She lived her whole life as a sideshow attraction. She quickly became popular, often appearing in newspapers and cabinet photographs as a curiosity of nature and a symbol of gentle monstrosity. As she grew older, she didn't enjoy just sitting there for people to stare, so she learned how to play the mandolin. Wearing feminine, fashionable clothing and taking care of herself, she appealed to the audience and became more than just a bearded lady. During her time with Barnum and Bailey, she even advocated against the usage of the word freak to describe the sideshow performers, as it was dehumanizing and pushed the idea that they were so different from the general public. As someone who spent her entire life in the circus, she was an exceptional advocate for the protection and integrity of circus sideshow performers and circus women. Annie married circus barker Richard Elliott. His job was to entice people to watch the show as they passed by. He was an adult and she was only 15 when they married, but their marriage ended in divorce in 1885. Annie married again to a man named William Donovan, for which they traveled as a duo act until his death 4 years later. She returned to Barnum's greatest show on earth. It was, after all, the only family she really knew. She died in 1902 from tuberculosis at the age of 37. They did not know exactly why Annie was born with so much facial hair, but speculate she had a condition called hirsutism, which is estimated to affect 5 to 10% of women. Vivian Wheeler, born in 1948, was covered in fine blonde facial hair and was born intersex. Her father saw her unusual appearance as a way to make money, sending her to work in sideshows from the age of 5. She spent most of her childhood traveling with circuses, including Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey Circus, where other bearded ladies became more like family than her own parents. At home, her father pressured her to shave so she could fit into society, but Wheeler eventually embraced her beard and identity. Deeply religious, she believed God made her exactly as she was. Performing under the name Melinda Maxey, she wore a veil on stage before revealing her beard to the audiences, often answering questions about her appearance and her life. Though her career brought fame and attention, life on the road was difficult, with long hours, poor living conditions, and little privacy. She married 4 times, and occasionally shaved for partners or family, but ultimately chose to let her beard grow naturally again, saying she felt happiest being herself. By the 1990s, Wheeler's beard had grown over 11 inches long, earning her the recognition in the Guinness Book of World Records and appearances with Ripley's Believe It or Not. In 2004, frustrated by poor pay and disrespect in the sideshow industry, she retired. Today, she continues to share her story and hopes one day to officially hold the record for the longest beard on a woman. Far sadder and darker history comes with my next story of the man who was named Lobster Boy. Grady Stiles, born in 1937, he was born with a genetic condition called ectrodactyly, in which fingers and toes are fused together to form claw-like extremities. The carnival world has always been filled with strange attractions, unusual performers, and stories darker than the bright lights of the Midway ever revealed. But few stories are as disturbing or as tragic as the life and death of Grady Stiles Jr., the Lobster Boy. Born into a family with the rare genetic condition, Grady's hands and feet were split and claw-like in appearance, giving rise to the cruel nickname that would follow him for his entire life. But behind the carnival banners and sideshow acts was a man feared by his own family and eventually murdered in his living room. According to family history, the Stiles bloodline had carried ectrodactyly as far back as the 1840s. By the time Grady Stiles Jr. was born in 1937, the condition had already become part of a family business. His father, Grady Stiles Sr., worked as a sideshow attraction in traveling carnivals, turning the family's deformity into profit. And when young Grady was only 7 years old, he too was placed into the act. Audience stared as his father and son were displayed under the stage name The Lobster Family. For carnival crowds, it was entertainment. For Grady, it was the only life he knew. Because of his condition, Grady could not walk normally. Although he sometimes used a wheelchair, he most often moved using only his arms and hands. Over time, his upper body became incredibly strong, and according to the closest to him, that strength became terrifying when combined with his violent temper and alcoholism. When the carnival season ended, the Stiles family settled in Gibsonton, a small Florida town famous for housing carnival performers during the winter months. There, unusual performers blended into everyday life. Giant men, bearded ladies, sword swallowers, and sideshow attractions all called it their hometown. But even in a community filled with outsiders, Grady gained a reputation for being feared. Family members later described years of abuse, drunken rage, and violence inside the household. His first wife, Mary Teresa, eventually left him and married Harry Glenn Newman, a little person carnival performer known as the smallest man in the world. But Grady's story was about to get even darker. On September 28, 1978, in Pittsburgh, Grady committed the crime that shook even the carnival world. On the eve of his daughter's wedding, Grady reportedly became enraged because he disapproved of her fiancé. That night, he shot the young man and killed him. What made the case even more unbelievable was that Grady openly confessed. He showed no remorse, and he was convicted of third-degree murder. But despite the conviction, Grady never went to prison. Authorities claim no prison facility at the time could properly care for someone with his physical condition. Instead, he was sentenced to house arrest and probation. To many people, it felt as though the Lobster Boy had literally gotten away with murder. For a short time afterward, Grady reportedly stopped drinking. He even reunited with his first wife, Mary Teresa. But the peace did not last. Soon the drinking returned, and according to family members, so did the abuse. By the early 1990s, tensions inside the home had become unbearable. Then, in 1992, the story took one final horrifying turn. Mary Teresa, along with her son, Harry Glenn Newman Jr., became involved in a murder-for-hire plot against Grady. A 17-year-old carnival sideshow performer named Chris Wyant was allegedly offered $1,500 to kill him. One night, Grady sat alone on his couch, smoking a cigarette and watching a movie called Monkey Boy. That was when the gunman entered the house. 2 shots were fired into Grady's head. Lobster Boy was dead. What happened afterwards may be the most chilling part of the story. Despite spending decades as a famous sideshow attraction, almost nobody came to his funeral. Reports claim only 10 people attended. And even more disturbing, no one volunteered to carry his coffin. The man, once displayed before crowds as a living curiosity, died hated, feared, and almost completely alone. Years later, Grady's son, Grady Stiles Jr., disputed parts of his story. According to him, his mother never directly ordered a murder. Instead, during an argument, she allegedly said, "Something needs to be done." Those words were overheard and eventually led to Grady's death. In the end, Mary Teresa was convicted of manslaughter. Harry Newman Jr. received a life sentence for first-degree murder, and Chris Wyant was sentenced to 27 years for second-degree murder. The story of Lobster Boy remains one of the darkest tales ever connected to the American carnival world. A man born into exploitation, raised as a sideshow attraction, consumed by violence, and ultimately murdered by the people closest to him. Next, we have a performer who chose the life of the carnival and was not born into it. The great Farini, the daredevil who defied death. In the 1800s, crowds gathered by the thousands to watch men risk their lives for fame, fortune, and glory. But few performers captured the public imagination quite like William Leonard Hunt, better known to the world as the Great Farini. He was a tightrope walker, inventor, explorer, circus promoter, and master showman. He crossed raging waterfalls, survived tragedy, searched for lost cities, and helped shape the modern circus entertainment. His life so unbelievable that parts of it still sound like fiction today. William Leonard Hunt was born in June 1838 in Lockport. From the beginning, he was rebellious and fearless. His parents were strict disciplinarians, but punishment only seemed to encourage his wild streak. Young William loved swimming so much that when his mother sewed his clothes shut to stop him from sneaking away to the river, he simply swam with his clothes instead. In 1843, the family moved to what is now Port Hope, and later to Bowmanville. It was there that William's life changed forever, after he secretly attended a traveling circus. The music, danger, the excitement completely captivated him. Soon he began secretly training his body, building strength and practicing acrobatics. Before long, he organized his own small circus performance in town. Amazingly, the show was a success and he earned $6, a considerable amount for a young boy at the time. But the triumph didn't last long. Angry parents stormed the performance, including William's furious father, who publicly whipped him for disgracing the family. Instead of crushing his spirit, the punishment only strengthened his determination to become an entertainer. As a young man, Hunt was apprenticed to a doctor, but adventure called louder than medicine ever could. On October 1st, 1859, he made his first professional high-wire performance above the Ganaraska River in Port Hope during the Durham County Agricultural Fair. He adopted the stage name Signor Farini, inspired by Italian statesman Luigi Carlo Farini. His performance was a sensation. Farini quickly began touring fairs throughout Ontario and joined Dan Rice's floating circus, performing as both tightrope walker and strongman along the Mississippi River. But Farini wanted more than success. He wanted to surpass the greatest tightrope walker in the world, Charles Blondin. In 1860, Farini arrived at Niagara Falls, determined to outdo Blondin's legendary crossings. Crowds packed the area to witness the dangerous performances. Farini crossed the falls carrying a man on his back. He walked blindfolded with a sack covering his body. He performed somersaults on the rope and even hung suspended by his feet high above the roaring waters below. Every performance was designed to push the limits of danger. The rivalry between Farini and Blondin became one of the greatest showdowns in circus history. But despite his fame, Farini often lived in Blondin's shadow. During one royal visit to Niagara Falls, the future King Edward VII attended Blondin's performance, while ignoring Farini entirely. A slight Farini reportedly never forgot. When the American Civil War began, Farini joined the Union Army's Engineers Regiment. He later claimed he also served as a spy. During the war, he designed portable rope bridges and even invented strange pontoon shoes that supposedly allowed a person to walk on water. According to Farini, he demonstrated the invention before Abraham Lincoln himself. But tragedy struck in 1862 during a performance in Havana. Farini was crossing a tightrope carrying his wife on his shoulders when she suddenly lost her balance. He desperately tried to save her, grabbing at her dress as she fell. She plunged 60 feet into the crowd below. Days later, she died from her injuries. The horrifying accident devastated Farini, but he continued performing. By the late 1860s, Farini realized his dangerous career could end in death at any moment. He retired from performing and reinvented himself as a circus promoter and inventor. This may have been where his greatest influence truly began. Farini helped develop what became known as the Human Cannonball Act, one of the most famous circus attractions ever created. A young performer named Rosa Matilda Richter became an international sensation using Farini's apparatus. Farini also managed and promoted countless unusual acts, understanding better than almost anyone what audiences wanted: danger, mystery, and spectacle. He partnered at times with the legendary showman P.T. Barnum and exhibited bizarre attractions including the heavily tattooed George Constantinos. One of his most controversial acts involving adopting a young Laotian girl named Creo Farini, and exhibiting her publicly as the missing link. By then, Farini had become less of a performer and more an architect of the spectacle itself. In 1885, Farini left show business behind temporarily for an even greater adventure. He traveled to Africa and claimed to have crossed the deadly Kalahari Desert on foot, an extraordinary feat at the time. Farini and his adopted son Lulu documented the journey with sketches and photographs. During the expedition, Farini claimed they discovered the legendary lost city of Kalahari, a mysterious ruined civilization buried deep within the desert. The discovery captured public imagination around the world. But there was one problem. No one had ever been able to prove that the city even existed. To this day, historians debate whether Farini truly found ancient ruins or simply exaggerated the story for publicity. Farini eventually settled into a quieter life, though quiet for him still meant promoting entertainers, experimenting with inventions, studying horticulture, and creating artwork. He promoted famous performers, including Eugen Sandow and Vesta Tilley, before returning to England and later returning to Canada. In his later years, he lived in several places before finally settling once again in Port Hope. On January 17, 1929, William Leonard Hunt, the great Farini, died from influenza at the age of 90. The great Farini lived more lives than most people can imagine. He was a daredevil who challenged the Niagara Falls, an inventor who changed circus history, an explorer chasing lost cities through the desert, and above all else, a master showman who understood that people always gathered to witness the impossible. Even today, more than a century later, his story still feels larger than life. And one of those most fascinating performers promoted by William Leonard Hunt was the man known as George Constantinos, a heavily tattooed circus attraction whose incredible story shocked audiences across Europe and North America. Covered almost entirely from head to toe in elaborate tattoos, he claimed the markings had not been done willingly. According to his story, he had once been an adventurer, traveling through Asia during the 1860s as part of a mining expedition, searching for gold in Burma. During the journey, he and his companions were captured after becoming involved in a rebellion against local authorities. What happened next sounded like something from a nightmare. George claimed he was held prisoner and forcibly tattooed over a 3-month period as punishment. He said 4 men had to hold him down while artists covered his body using indigo and cinnabar dyes. Nearly every inch of his skin was tattooed except for the soles of his feet and parts of his ears. The tattoos reportedly included hundreds of images, exotic animals, flowers, geometric patterns, and foreign writing, with some accounts claiming there's as many as 388 separate figures across his body. According to George, many of his companions died during the ordeal. He eventually escaped, traveling through China before finally making his way back to Europe. Whether every detail of the story was true remains uncertain. When doctors and anthropologists later examined him, they confirmed the tattoos appeared to be authentic Burmese-style tattooing, though some scholars questioned parts of his dramatic tale and doubted such extensive tattooing could really have been completed in only 3 months. True or not, the mystery surrounding his tattoos only made him more famous. By the mid-1870s, George had become an international sensation, eventually touring with the legendary showman P.T. Barnum and earning enormous crowds eager to witness the tattooed Greek prince for themselves. When not appearing nearly naked on stage to display his tattoos, George dressed lavishly in expensive clothing and jewelry, adding even more mystery and spectacle to the already unbelievable image. In the early 1880s, he was exhibited at London's Royal Aquarium in a show arranged by Farini himself. Another example of Farini's talent for finding extraordinary acts that blurred the line between truth, myth, and performance. On a final note, the circus has always been more than just a performance. It has been a mirror of fascination, of fear, of how easily audiences can turn human lives into entertainment when the lights are bright enough and the distance is just wide enough. Behind every act was a person, not a label, not a banner, not a curiosity. Just someone trying to exist inside a world that paid to watch them do it. Thank you for listening to this episode on Shadow Skull Studios. I really do appreciate all of you for listening, and I hope you'll come back again and listen to another story. Until then, stay curious. Bye for now.